Excuse me. My name is Manny Yap. I'm with NetWoven, and this webinar will last for about 15 minutes with a Q&A session. We ask that since everyone is on mute, that if you have a question to state it on the chat, which is on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And if we don't get it addressed during the webinar, we will post the answers in our blog or send a follow-up email. Okay? So I've started the recording, and I will turn this over to Drew now.
Okay, thanks, Manny. So just quickly by introduction, I'm a practice director at NetWoven. I'm also the product manager for our Govern 365 product. I had the opportunity of working with the NetWoven and Govern 365 team for more than 12 years now. Let's go ahead and we'll click next here. I've been in the space for a long time. This is something that's been a core part of our practice for many years. Today I'm actually joined by two members of our team from our development side. We've got Disposition and Avamil. Both of these two have been integral to building out a lot of the innovation in the product and definitely responsible for overseeing the many new features that we'll be showing today as a part of kind of advising and coaching through some of the best practices in the managing of your Office 365 content lifecycle using Govern 365. So they will be helping out with any questions. Feel free to ask them in the chat like Manny had mentioned, and if we have any technical questions at the end, Disposition and Avamil will be here to help us answer those. So thanks for joining, guys. Just quickly, introduction to the company here for those that don't know. So NetWoven is a Microsoft Gold certified partner. We are Microsoft managed and also a Fast Track Ready partner. We operate in all three of the Microsoft clouds, so that's Office 365, Azure, and Dynamics. We have offices in both the US and India, and we've been fortunate to work with some great customers from around the globe, a number of which we've done governance related work for. So I think with no further ado, we will jump right into the meat of what we're looking at today. So our agenda for today is to do a quick introduction to Office 365 governance. We will then dive into talking about content lifecycle management in Office 365. And we're going to go through a series of slides as well as live demonstrations that show what we do in the space of provisioning, inventory and recertification, and disposal to really help automate and empower your administrators to be more effective with managing the life cycle of your content. Then we'll kind of touch on a little bit about next steps, and we'll open up for some Q&A at the end. We should have about 10 minutes or so at the end where we can discuss any questions. So quickly on the introduction side of the house, this is a slide I always like to start with. That I think most of us know that governance is a massive area. It's quite a hairy beast, but we try and boil the message down to its essence. And in doing that, what comes out is that it's really this delicate balance between providing a frictionless experience for our users without giving up our ability to maintain control. That's not always an easy balance to keep, but it's really what we're striving for as the core vision of our product, is to enable both users and administrators to have this fine balance. The next slide here, again, I think feeding more into the fact that governance is this big hairy topic. There are many different places that need investigation and need action in order for us to make sure that we've got a well-governed Office 365 environment, or any environment for that matter. Although this is a big topic, we are going to be focusing in a particular area today. Our team does work in all of these different areas, so by all means, if you have any questions as a follow-up, we're more than happy to dive in. Today we're going to be focusing on content lifecycle management, which is one of the core parts of the governance in Office 365 that kind of falls in the center of this Venn diagram. This is one of the main places where we really feel the rubber meets the road, and attention from your teams will gain the most value for time invested. So with that being said, let's dive into looking at content lifecycle management in Office 365. So I've tried to simplify the message here in that when we're looking at the content lifecycle of our content, that we've effectively got three main areas that we're looking at, three main phases. It always starts out with creation. That's where we begin. Somebody needs to be able to create a new location to create content, and we find that it's essential to have a self-service but well-managed process. You don't want something that anybody can go into with no oversight, no approval, no checks, because then you end up in the situation of having the Wild West of way too much content everywhere and you have a sprawl problem. The other side of the house, though, is that we know that users, when they require a new place to create content, to collaborate, whether that's a project or with a team, it's not good for us to have them waiting for hours or days or weeks for a manual process to actually go ahead and create that container for them. So we want something that's on demand, real time, but allows us to put controls in place, so that we're overseeing the process. The next phase that we have is typically the longest lifecycle phase. That's when we have active content. So, while the content is being used regularly, there are things that we still need to do during this phase of the life cycle. Typically, organizations are looking at employing regular checks to make sure that we're conforming to any defined governance policies. Say, for example, a lot of organizations say, if we're going to have a team, a group, a site in SharePoint or Office 365, we need to make sure that we have an active owner. That's kind of a core tenet a lot of the time. Otherwise, we don't have accountability for these containers and the content in them. So, there are many other instances of similar such situations, but we definitely want to make sure we have the ability to employ regular checks to make sure that we're on top of everything. And when we're doing that, it's not reasonable for us to expect, a person or a small team to own this. Many of us are working in enterprise environments with thousands or tens of thousands of containers with even more content in them. So what we need to do in order to effectively manage this is to crowdsource that out to the content owners, but we as administrators need to have a clear view and actually manage that process. We need to put the rules and policies in place that dictate ensuring that these content owners conform to that process that we have. Then at some point, inevitably, content is going to come to a state in which it needs to be retired. So I understand, again, that I'm simplifying here a little bit, that many organizations have a need to actually retain content for a certain amount of time. So we're simplifying here. I think in our next series of webinar events, we'll likely be covering some of the integrations with the Security and Compliance Center and talking a little bit more about retention. But in this particular case, we're simplifying and talking about retirement of the content. So as I mentioned, it inevitably at some point will become stale and unused, and at that point, it's really cluttering our environment more than providing value. So it's essential that we have some sort of disposal process in place that can be enacted in order to terminate this content and move it from the corpus of data that folks are working with. This is another space where it's not necessarily reasonable to expect that content owners are going to elect for disposal. I think if most users had their say, that they would just kind of keep everything forever, not understanding the negative impact that has on the productivity of people that are trying to search and find relevant and current content. So there's this process here where we want to make sure that we can automate and employ a retirement or disposal process at the end of the life cycle. So all of these three together allow us to have a view from beginning to end, and we're going to be talking in the slides coming up, as well as in the live demonstrations, about how we can use tools in Govern 365 in order to make sure that we've got a well-managed process all the way through. Okay, so as far as what we're going to be demoing today specifically, we have our provisioning tool. Some other folks may use their own built PnP-based provisioning solution. We have one that we've built into Govern 365, which helps offload the need for you to create and manage that yourself. And it also has a number of extra bells and whistles, which we've built in over the course of the last couple of years. The next piece is our recertification and reporting. So during the active stage of the life cycle, it's extremely important for us to be able to have an accurate view of the content in our system, as well as making sure that we can, prod and poll the content owners to recertify that the information and configuration of the containers that they have is correct. And then lastly, we have that end stage where we have a disposal process, which will help guide users through a more granular approach of disposing content and allowing them to actually have the opportunity to interrupt that process if it's needed. So we'll go ahead and we'll dive in and we'll get started on the provisioning side of the house. So a quick diagram here to show how this works. Effectively, what we're providing is a single pane of glass so that your Office 365 users can come in through one location, and they've got some great features in there. We've got forms and validation available, which you can actually configure in the browser. There's a provisioning wizard. So in many cases, I think one of the most vocal things that we hear from our customers is that there's so many workloads in Office 365, it's really difficult for our users to even understand which one they're supposed to use for a particular use case. So although there is some amount of education that needs to go into that we've also made sure that we've built directly into the process a wizard-based approach that asks a few simple questions and guides folks to the right workload or template for their particular need. We also have the ability to manage templates so that folks can create sites, groups, teams, Yammer groups, whatever they need that are most closely aligned to their particular use case, and it minimizes the amount of manual work that needs to be done after the container is created. We seed in a number of these templates, and you also have the ability as a user of Govern 365 to generate your own templates from existing sites. And then, lastly, on the upfront piece here, we have workflow implemented through Flow that we seed in. You can use your workflow tool of choice. We're agnostic, but for approvals or for education or learning requirements, there's a templated workflow which we have in here that can be adjusted to your need. Then I think, as I mentioned a minute ago, we have the ability to create all of the different container types, including the 3 different flavors of unified groups, which are most oftenly used now in Office 365 environments that we're seeing. We support both SharePoint Classic and Modern, as well as subsites for those of you that are still using them. So we try and cover the entire gamut when it comes to the workflows so that you can use this as your single pane of glass. And then lastly, at the end, there's a number of different post-provisioning functionality that's available so that, again, getting the creation of this container as close as possible to what our users are going to need to minimize that manual effort that would need to be done for each container that's created. We have the capability to inject information architecture, content, branding, governance policies, a whole bunch of different things. You have these tools at your disposal to best create these templates. So that's at a high level what this looks like. Although provisioning is an extremely important part of your governance plan, it's not the core focus for today because this is something that we've covered in other webinars. I am going to take a quick look and show you through some of the highlights here. But for those of you that are new, if you do have additional questions in this area, that's something that we'd be more than happy to connect on separately. So let me open this up here. So I'm going to dive into the Govern 365 user interface here. This is the dashboard. This shows me sites that have been created because I'm an administrator. We see a lot. For most folks, they would just see their own containers that they've requested. So I can either click my plus button here, or I can come in and submit a new request. This launches our wizard-based process here. So if I feel that I'm someone that already has my Microsoft PhD, I understand the workloads, I don't really need somebody to guide me through, I can just say, let me at the templates. I'll select the one that I want. So I can go ahead and scroll through here, make a selection from what's available. We have the ability to apply descriptions in here as well, if that's of any help to to distinguish between these. But effectively, a person can just select this and move to the next screen. What I'm going to do before I do that is actually jump back here to show you the provisioning wizard. So this is the other option that folks can take if they don't necessarily feel like they have the know-how here. The provisioning wizard helps pick that best workload. So effectively, we ask a few clarifying questions here. And the first option here is to say, if I'm somebody that's come in and decide I want to share authoritative content, if I make that selection, we're suggesting a modern communication site in SharePoint Online. If I'm somebody that wants to collaborate with my colleagues, there's an additional question here about the conversational medium that I prefer. If I select email, it's going to suggest an Outlook group, persistent chat, Teams, so on and so forth. And then the last option here is if I want to engage and interact in a social setting with coworkers, it's going to suggest a Yammer group. So we have the ability to fairly easily dispel a lot of confusion that users may have when we present them with too many workload options or expect them to actually navigate to the right workload first and then create something there by having a single pane of glass and this simple process to clarify that. So I'll just choose as an example here as we walk through an Outlook group. So you'll see here we have a form. This form is entirely dynamic based on the container that's created, and there's also a lot of things that we use based on the client context. With me logged in, there's certain things that we can default in here as well. For example, a cost center is a custom piece of metadata that some of our customers require. It's something that I've configured and added in here. I can come in and provide the name for the group. If I decide to be smart and put something in here that maybe the organization doesn't want, we have the ability to manage restricted words to kind of prevent folks from doing that. So if I come back in here and just say webinar group, we'll see that automatically generates an ID. You'll also notice here that we've got the ability to do naming conventions. Out of the box, you have some of these capabilities, but it's nowhere near as flexible as what we can offer. We can actually default things in here that are specific to the logged in user or any of the other metadata that's being captured here in the form. So that's a nice piece of functionality. We have the ability here, because this is a group, I can say whether I want a public or private group. I'll just keep it public here. This security classification is tied into the Microsoft out-of-the-box set of values that are available to classify your containers. And we support this ubiquitously across all container types, not just for some of them like out of the box. But it's nice to be able to consistently have this applied to all of your containers. If you're taking the first steps into having a more security and compliance focus, this is a great way to step in before you're really getting into doing things at a per document or per content level. We also have the ability to gather other information, which, this is an example functional area. I can select marketing. We see here that I've got, certain fields available. If I change this to finance, it cascades down, so we can have cascading relationships. And many times we've found that the functional area or department associated with the site is something that's extremely important for deciding and dictating the rules that we have down the line. So when we're trying to decide how often do we need to recertify information, ownership, how long do we need to keep a site for before we start a disposal process, that may vary quite widely depending on whether this is marketing or whether it's quality. So something important to gather. We have the ability to publish this into a list that can be used as a directory, and we have the ability to gather owners here, so you have a nice people picker control to pick whoever you like. So once I've got all my information filled out, I can go ahead and click next. It does a final review and confirmation, and I can submit that request for creation. But depending on the complexity of the template that you've chosen, this can take anywhere from a few seconds to minutes. Effectively, that is the process here. If you would like to follow up, there's this in-browser configuration request form here that allows us to basically drive and configure that entire process. I'm not going to go through this today, but we'd be more than happy to follow up with that if folks are interested. Okay, so that's a quick look at the provisioning side so that we can manage the front end. I'll jump back later after that's created and just show that quickly. So the next section we have here is getting into that active phase of the content lifecycle. So it's key for us to be able to understand the environment that we're working in. And unfortunately, there's a number of things out of the box that I think are left to the imagination as far as really having all of the information that we need at our fingertips in order to make insightful decisions. So what we've done is we've actually complemented what's there out of the box with creating our own set of inventory reports. So you can configure the tool to actually gather inventory all across your environment. We're making sure that we've got a scalable, cost-effective data storage to keep this in Azure. So it's also something that helps provide data sovereignty. So we don't store your critical information. You're storing your critical information secured in your Azure environment. And it comes at a very, very low cost. I mean, I'm talking like a few dollars a year, something to that effect. We also have very detailed container content and user information that can be used. We're updating this every few hours. We actually attach to the activity API. So we're pulling in information as it's being filtered through, as folks are using the content. It's moving very quickly into the content inventory so that you're able to use that to make your best decisions. And I think one very cool thing that we have in here is that many times when we're making decisions as content owners or administrators about whether content is still in use, is to look at who's actually using this stuff. So when we're looking at a lot of the out-of-the-box capabilities, we're seeing things like when was something last modified. But just because something was last modified sometime in the past, it doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't using it anymore. A lot of times content has a fairly long lifetime of value, so making sure that we can also complement that information with when it was last accessed is important for us to have that full view of whether the content is still being used or not. That's something that we're able to pull in every few hours. So we've got some fairly powerful Power BI reports that I will give you a quick view of here. Again, because we had previous sessions on this, this is not our main topic for today. We can dive in deeper if we need to, but I will show it. Just quickly before we go there, we see that this group that I created was provisioned. I can go ahead and click on this and it will take me directly to that group, and it's been provisioned as expected. So now I'll jump quickly over to Power BI. So this actually also embeds in the application, if you like. So you can come here and you can look directly at the reports. I like having the full view in Power BI, so I'm going to demonstrate it from here. I'll just touch on a few of the highlights. So this is kind of a cool report that we've created here. So because we have information about users as well as information about containers, this is something that a lot of times we use when we're looking at doing adoption-related work. So we can see here that sales and marketing has a fairly large number of SharePoint sites, but they've got a very small number of unified groups. Now, usually as we're modernizing our intranets these days, we're trying to influence people to flip-flop that relationship, to move away from SharePoint standalone sites and focus more in this collaborative area with that unified group infrastructure that provides all that extra value that Microsoft's brought to us. So this can be a great tool looking at the associations and allowing you to understand where your time would be best spent with which groups in order to maximize that productivity potential which is available to us from Office 365. There's some other things in here. We can also see, I've mentioned this as an example that we're going to take as a core thread through this, that understanding and maintaining active ownership in your containers is essential to make sure that you've got that accountability and oversight for the content that's actually housed in them. So this particular report actually offers us the ability to get ahead of the game and see which containers do we have that no longer have an active owner. This is something that often happens. Through attrition, people will leave the organization, and we will be left with a container that has users but no longer has an owner in it. This allows us to identify that and to take action on it. Right now, the action is not built into the tool, but we're actually currently working on something which will help automate taking this insight to action and allowing you to start processes that can be run by the users of the content to go ahead and assign new owners to these containers so that we can address that problem. Okay, so Also, we have some great content inventory information, so I'll dig into this. There are tabs in here specifically for each of the different container types, but we'll just take a look right now at the highest level here. So at the highest level, we've got, let me reload this. I'm not sure what, oh, of course it loaded as soon as I reloaded it. So, so what this shows is a number of different things. We've got our ability to slice and dice based on that content modified date that I was talking about. We also have the ability to slice and dice based on that last content access date. So if I wanted to see all of the teams that have been updated in the last month, I can go ahead and click on that here, and that will filter down my grid to show me only those containers. And I have the ability to kind of slice and dice any way that I want. Also, I think some of the other interesting things that you'll see in here is that we've got this control right here, which is talking about lifecycle state. So later on, when we get near to the end of the lifecycle process, we're going to be showing a disposition piece. And what that does is, when I mentioned that it moves us through a more granular process, that it will it actually manages a number of different states that move through there. So this allows us to have a view of that information and make sure that we as administrators can oversee that disposal process that's happening. And Manny, I'll take a quick pause there. Were there any questions or anything that we wanted to address while we're in the middle of the webinar here?
I have not seen any questions on the chat so far.
Okay, we'll keep rocking and rolling then. Okay, so that's a quick glimpse of the content inventory side of the house. I'm going to jump back to our deck. So the main focus of the session today is focused around this new feature that we have available, which is recertification. So we've heard time and time again from our customer base that they need to make sure that throughout the active life cycle of their containers and content, that they're able to manage certain things like overseeing that the ownership, the membership, the permissions, the classification of the sites, and more are all kept active, because they want to make sure that the content owners are accountable. They have somebody to be accountable, because they want to make sure that their down-the-stream processes are operating off of the correct classification information that may well have changed during the active life cycle of this container. So it should be the responsibility of the content owners to do the recertification. However, again, it's really not reasonable for us to expect them to do it on their own accord. So having the ability to facilitate and track the process of recertification through rules and automation is really a great way for us to keep current, minimize the effort required to manage this process, and ensure that it's being done consistently. So I'd like to show you next the recertification module so that everybody can have an idea of this. So before I show that quickly, just a few sites here. So our teams helped provision some sites to work with the demo. So I've got a legal site, I've got a finance group, I've got a legal group, and then I also had, where's my, oh, and here's the quality sites. So I've got another one here. So this might be getting a little technical, but I just wanted to show quickly one of the things that we do when we provision your containers, like we did at the very beginning, is that data that you provide, that classification information, actually gets written into the site. So it persists with it. So the cost center's in there, the department area is in there, along with a whole bunch of other things that we use to help facilitate these processes. So with that being the case, what I wanted to do here first was, we're not going to wait for all the mechanics of Office 365 and Flow to kick in. So I'm actually going to start this process so that we can just have it running in the background. I'm just kicking off the flow that would be kicked off on a regular basis. We run our recertification background job on a daily basis, so this would normally kick this off. I'm just doing that right now to keep us moving. If I get this thing out of the way. So while that's running, let me just show you quickly here. So in our content lifecycle management navigation area here, so as administrators, we may want to set up certain policies that help us manage that recertification process. So I've just gone to the screen, and we have the ability to have more than one policy in place. So it may be the case that we say, hey, look, as a catch-all, if nothing else applies, we want to make sure that our owners are recertifying on a 12-month basis, so every year. And this is for all container types. We can apply to one or more, in this case all. And today we're just showing ownership. We're going to be adding in the whole permissions and metadata and other items in the coming weeks. But we've just simplified this now just to show one state. So our activity is to recertify ownership, 12 months. Now, again, this is one of a number of rules here, so I have other ones that are in here as well. For legal, what I've done is, instead of just saying, hey, go ahead and run this for everything with no additional criteria, I've said, actually, you know what? Only for this rule, let's only have this apply to department areas that are legal. And for the legal team, we're going to recertify a little bit more often. We think it's more important for us to do that. We're going to do every 6 months. And then lastly here, I've got one other one for the quality group where we said, hey, look, this is maybe the most volatile and most important for us to make sure we have correct. So this one we've set up 2 months, and maybe in this particular case, it's only for SharePoint sites where they're keeping quality documents, and we've got that same kind of criteria binding here for quality. So this allows us to have a number of different rules that employ what we need, and you have a number of options here more. So there's a number of out-of-the-box fields, but also when we get into that configuration that I quickly showed on provisioning, we can add any of the custom metadata fields that we want in here so that you can use them as criteria to configure your recertification rules. But for now, we're keeping it simple, quality, 2 months. So with that process running in the background, what it's actually done is I've set it up to run. I'll actually show a preview here quickly. So what we can do is we can say, before I actually go run the rule itself, you can run a quick preview and it will show you the results of the containers that are expected to be caught in the dragnet of this rule's configuration and its criteria. So after this finishes, this is kind of scanning through the entire inventory right now, taking a look at what's there, and it should come back and let me know that the one site which is caught by this particular rule is that quality site. So, sorry, I opened the wrong rule. That's not very helpful. Let me go to the right one here. Let me click this one more time, so we'll preview this result. We've got the 2 month one here, so this is quality. So this comes back and shows us that, yes, it is that one quality site that we had created, which is, meeting the criteria of needing to have a recertification. So what that process does in the background is it actually, the flow runs, it does a whole bunch of different things to understand, the site, the state that it's in, and what it does is it decides, hey, I need to do something here. There's a task that needs to be created to confirm the ownership. So I, as a user now, because I'm an owner of that site, I actually received an email here just a minute ago that says, hey, Drew, you've got a recertification task that requires your assistance. So what I can do is I can actually click into this now, and that goes to all of the owners of the site. So I'm one, Navanil's another. He also received the same email. And when I come in here now, we can see that in this My Content Lifecycle task that it's opened up, I have a task in here. It's saying it's in progress, it's an ownership task, it's for this particular site, I need to do something with it. So what I can do as the owner, I can check in here, and this actually loads the information to say, hey Drew, you've got this quality site, here's the current people that are the owners of the site, does this look good? Does anything need to change? So it may be the case that, Navanil's left the team, I don't need him on here anymore, so I can go ahead and I can actually remove him, and when I do this, it in real time will remove him from the ownership, the owner group in this site, so that he's no longer active. And what I can do is I can say, but now I have a new member of my team, Devashish, and he's going to be helping me manage this site. So I can go ahead and save that, and what this does is it actually adds that information in there, does it in real time. I'll show you before I complete the task here. So I can go back to my quality site, and I'll close this out for now. If I go into the site settings here, we'll actually see that those permissions have directly gone into place. I can look at my owners group, So Navanil is gone, and Devashish is added now. So it's a nice way for us to surface this through a very simple interface for folks to manage that. And now that I'm done with this, I can actually say, hey, I recertify that this is in good shape now. And what that will do is that will complete that flow task. It will close out the flow, and everything's then done. And because we keep track of all of this information, again, in those properties I was showing you, this is now good for 2 months. It won't get picked up in the Dragnet until we've passed the 2 months, because that's the way that we configured the rule, and it will come back again. I'm not quite sure why this is taking so long, but I think we can move forwards here. So that's what we're looking at from a recertification point of view. Like I said, we have a number of new activities that are going to be coming out in the coming weeks to further empower your team to make sure that throughout the active life cycle of your content that we are keeping everything up to date. So the next stage here, and actually I'll pause again, Manny, anything on there that anybody had questions on that we want to dive into?
There are 3 questions, and I can read them for you. For recertification, should there be identification of capability, governance around who can be owner, i.e. only power users, to enable and sustain commitment accountability? So that was first.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, so maybe let's table that to the end, and we can address that in our Q&A.
Yeah, and then are there definition or details of the ideal profile of an owner, aka power user of a site collection?
So typically we leave that to the organization to define. So I mean, in this particular case, we've offered the ability for folks to select somebody who is an owner, but I think it's a good point that, you know, sometimes organizations, before they allow somebody to become a content owner, they require them to go through some training in order to make sure that they understand the responsibility that comes along with the empowerment that they're being provided to be an owner on a container. So I'd be more than happy to discuss offline looking at doing something like that, but I think effectively what we would need to do is, if a organization had a learning requirement or something similar around that, we would need to look at filtering our people picker control so that it only enables somebody to select someone that has actually gone through that certification. So that would definitely be something that we can discuss in more detail.
And then the last one is, what are your plans dealing with governance around security and compliance? And maybe you can address that at the end.
That's a great question. So we have some really interesting things that are happening in that place. It's not the topic of the discussion today. I think that would be something we need to take offline, but I'm also 99.9% sure that's going to be the topic of our next webinar. Okay? So we'll circle back a little bit more at the end. Thanks, Manny. So the final piece here that we're taking a look at is the end phase. So we've created a templatized disposition flow that comes along with some communications and some on-screen user experience that helps guide folks through this process. So we can do some work of managing sprawl up front. There's also some work of maintaining and managing sprawl on the back end by making sure that we dispose of things once they've received or once they've achieved their end of life cycle. There are out-of-the-box controls for this as well. So some of us may be familiar with site policies. Some of us may be familiar with the Azure AD group expiration. These do have some capabilities. They're a bit simplistic in the way that you can trigger them. There were some recent enhancements which have been nice, which kind of circumvent that process from continuing to run if folks use a site, which is nice. But I believe there's an extra licensing cost that comes in with the Azure AD group expiration, and there's still, I think, a lot to be left to the imagination again on managing this process. So we actually have an automated process that allows you to use criteria to work on having a workflow effectively that manages this entire process for all of your different container types. So there's a couple screenshots here, but what I would like to do is actually just dive into the demo so that everybody can see this. We've got a pretty clear demo. So that wrapped up. My recertification task is done. That's all closed now. So the next thing I'd like to show here is that similarly in this content lifecycle management space, as well as our recertification, which we use in the active phase, we've got our disposal rules that help us for the end of life. So you can have, again, as many of these as you want. I've got one created here specifically for the webinar, so I'm going to go in and edit this rule. And what we see here is that I've selected this one just to work with SharePoint site collections, just to make this simple. And actually, hey, one point I just remembered quickly is that when we looked at recertification, that the owners had been added into the owners group in SharePoint. I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows this also works for teams and groups, all of the unified group types, where those owners would be added and removed from the actual group that is the owner Active Directory group. So we make sure that we do it in the right place. It works well across all the containers, just to make sure that nobody was concerned about that. So in this particular case, now we're looking at a disposition rule. So in this case, I've set up rule criteria here to say that I want this to work on any SharePoint site collections where the last modified date is more than 3 years ago. If I wanted to, again, I have the ability to further refine this. I have those same kind of refinement criteria available to me that I had in my recertification rules. So I have, by all means, the power to do that. I'm going to keep it simple right now and just, go with this. And there's a number of actions I can perform. So, I can actually delete. I can delete permanently a site. I can lock it. I can send an email showing which sites met the criteria. I can make something read-only. Typically what we recommend, though, is that the flow action be used. This is where we've built all of the power into our tooling. So similarly here, I can run a show results again to see if this rule were to run, what would be caught in its dragnet. So again, we've got one particular site here, the Disposition demo site. That's the one that we're going to operate on and take a look. So because this flow, again, takes a minute to run, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to kickstart this. That would normally be kickstarted by our disposal process that runs every night. We're trying to make this happen quick here, so I'll kick that off. And while that's running through, I'll actually show you what this looks like. So this first site that we have, this demo site, is in an active state. Looks the way we would expect it to look. Nothing strange going on here. The next one is in our next stage, which is the owner's alert stage. If you remember, we saw that in our content inventory report as one of the phases. So in here, what we see is there's an alert across the top, and it's letting me know that this has been scheduled for disposal. Do I still need to keep this thing or not? Now, I as an owner see this, but what I can do is I have another persona here that I can jump over to quickly. So this here, I'm logged in as just a normal user. And this normal user, let's see here. So I'll just do a quick refresh, but on the same site, just to show you, I don't see the banner. So the reason that is that we have a client context-based search here that actually checks if the logged in user is an owner. And the idea is that we don't want to alarm all of the users if we can just notify a couple of owners and have them manage that process. So if it's still active, they can just say at any point in time, hey, I'm still using this thing, cancel it. And then as we move through the phases, though, because it could be the case that we have an absentee owner, they've left the organization, or maybe they just, they're not actively using it anymore. The next phase is a phase where we actually alert all of the users. You can see here we've got this alert users phase. Let me get this out of the way. So I, as the owner, I see the banner. But also, if I jump back over to my other persona and I move over to this demo site too, we're seeing that even a normal user now sees this. So they also have the ability to cancel the disposal. The idea is that we want to empower anybody using this site to quickly be able to stop the process, to say, hey, if we're using this thing, don't delete it, I need it. But at the same time, not have to require administrators to manually follow up with people or employ rules that don't really cover all of their bases in order to try and automate the deletion of these things so that we're not cluttering our environment. And then the last phase that we have is a read-only phase before we dispose of the container. And the idea around this is that some folks may have synced content that they may be working on, and maybe they don't actually visit the SharePoint site. So this would be a last kind of ditch effort to say if we make it read-only and they're trying to edit content, they're no longer going to be able to do that. That's going to warn them that something's going on and to look into it. So we have this multi-stage process. I'm going to jump back to my owner persona here. So at the beginning, we had this disposition demo site in its active state. This was the one that we saw was going to be caught by our rule. So if I refresh this now, what we should see is that the alert should come up, which didn't, right? Huh, okay. Well, unfortunately, it looks like we ran into some kind of issue here. Okay, I'm not sure why that happened. I'll try one more quick try, and if not, you're just going to have to believe me that that's the way that it works. Let's try this one more time here. And again. Okay, so we'll run one more test. So let's take a look here. Yeah, so we'll let that run one more time, but effectively, I can actually show the same thing here anyway, that if I want to, I can cancel the process from here. And the team has also built this because we know this is only showing in the SharePoint interface, and not everybody is always going to be here to see it, that we've also got an email way of dealing with this. So we'll see here that, you know, there's I tested this earlier, so this came across a bit earlier. We can use this one, or now it looks like, okay, now it's available, so it looks like the second time works. I don't know why that failed the first time. But what we've done is we've used an actionable card here. I think there's still a little bit of work to do on the user interface that we'll enhance this with. But this actually allows somebody from a single click of a button here to do the same thing that we would also do on the site, which let me see if, there we go. So it worked this time around. The little snafu there. So I can just cancel the process. It says, you sure you want to do that? Okay. And what this does behind the scenes is it does a little update to the site so that you know, the last modified and last access dates are reset. Typically that's something that's going to be included as a part of the criteria. And this now will not be caught in the dragnet of the rule that we had created for another 3 years because it's been recertified. So obviously, you know, you have the power to change this to whatever you want. That was just a sample that we set up. But now we're back into active state. So that is the disposition piece in a nutshell. So I think now we'll move to wrapping things up since we're getting into our last 10 minutes here, and we will open up for any questions. So just a quick recap. I think you know, more and more Office 365 service owners are enabling their users to collaborate more efficiently without requiring them to understand all the workloads, and being able to make sure, you know, whether you build your own solution, whether you decide to use Govern 365, make sure you do something that injects that knowledge and that simplicity into your provisioning process, because this is just time and time again one of the biggest frustrations that we hear from users and from service owners, you know, indirectly from their users. Secondly, make sure that you leverage the power of the crowd to recertify your content, you know, whether that's for ownership, permissions, categorization, whatever it is. This is not something that, you know, we want to have, you know, employ full-time people to do. This is something that needs to be sourced out, and it's essential for us to make sure that we have this so that we can better manage, you know, all of the retention, disposition, security and compliance elements down the line. All of this feeds into this larger picture of security and compliance. We also talked about taking advantage of valuable insights. You know, so, you know, whether that's your adoption content pack, whether it's what you have in the admin center, or, you know, whether it's what we've built in Govern 365, there's a lot of really useful information that you can use to supercharge your management of your content lifecycle plan. And then lastly, you know, again, whether it's site policies, whether it's group expiration, whether it's something you build yourself, or whether it's Govern 365's disposal process, make sure that you use automation to address that cleanup on the back end. Otherwise, those things end up sitting around forever, or your service owners and administrators end up having to email tons of people all of the time asking, are you still using this? Are you still using this? And, you know, kind of herding the cats. It's just not a fun job. So I think lastly here, the call to action. So please connect with us on your governance and adoption related initiatives. As I mentioned, Govern 365 is a product that handles a slice of the governance pie. Today we focused even on a smaller slice of just really the deep dive on the recertification piece. But we do a ton of work through workshops and other consulting engagements with organizations, whether that's security and compliance, whether it's a health check on the configuration of your tenant, whether it's governance, kind of planning this larger thing with policies, procedures, and committees and configurations, whether it's OneDrive for business planning, adoption services, whatever it is, please feel free to reach out. We've got a great team that really has deep, deep knowledge in these areas, working with customers for many years now. You can also visit our website. We've got a free trial there available if you want to get Govern 365 going, and our team is more than happy to help you roll that out. We've got a great onboarding and jumpstart program that can help you get where you need to quickly get that working. You could also on the website request a demo if you wanted to deep dive into anything that we maybe didn't have the opportunity to get into today in a little bit more depth. We can do that. We've got a special offer today for everybody that signed up for the webinar. So in the next 2 months, if you were interested in purchasing Govern 365, we'll actually make that onboarding package free, and we've got a discounted first year on the licensing. And then I think more than anything, just please reach out, stay tuned. We're going to have more webinar series coming. I think the security and compliance one that should be coming up in the near future is going to be a really exciting one. So with that being said, we've got our expert panel here, and we're more than happy to field any questions. So Manny, did you want to remind me of the other one, or we go through some questions?
So the other question was for recertification, should there be so for your certification, should there be an identification of capability governance around who can be the owner, power users to enable and sustain commitment and accountability?
Okay, so that sounded fairly similar then to the question that I did answer. So yes, I think from a governance point of view, it very much makes sense to vet and prepare the people that you're going to enable to have this power so that, again, they have the responsibility and understanding of what that comes with. So I believe that was a similar question to the other one.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I think the question that I wanted to remind you, are there definition or details for ideal profile? And what are your plans in dealing governance around scared? So I think those are the ones that came in earlier that you wanted to cover. Why don't we just open so if you have a question, just unmute yourself and speak on the microphone. We have a minute. The other one that came in, what about a modern way that this become compatible, and someone answered it from our team already. So go ahead and ask your question.
Shy crowd.
No, that's fine. I received my answer in the chat to about the modern pages. So.
Okay, great. Good to hear that.
Anyone else?
Is there any place where we can see the other webinars?
Yeah, they're actually published on our website. So let me see if I can pull this up here real quick.
Because this is only a part of the big picture.
Yeah, definitely. So on the Govern 365 website right here, we've got webinars. So there's this is the most recent one, but there's other ones here. So you can go ahead and just click through and open those up to see what we've shown in the past. And again, if you have any specifics, we're more than happy to deep dive into an individual session with you. No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, cheers.
A general question maybe, what about archiving?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, in the disposal process, there's capabilities to support that. So, we have the ability, obviously, with Microsoft Teams now, that's something that we can do, and it's a good interim phase between active and delete. So we do have the ability to archive Microsoft Teams. That's something that we can do. As far as SharePoint sites, there's not necessarily a specific archive functionality which is available. But if we wanted to look at doing something to employ that, I mean, right now we have the read-only phase. Or, we could look at also adding something in which would actually be like a removal of permissions if we wanted to make something so that it kind of removes off the list, but is still available to, to bring back online rather than it getting deleted. So that's not something that we have specifically built into the flow right now. But because of the fact that we're providing this as a templated flow, you purchase the product, you get all of this goodness with it. We have the ability to work with you to modify any of these flows to meet your needs, or by all means, you can do that yourself. So, if we want to build something in, that's something that we can add. And, we're always open to ideas. We've got a lot of interesting things on our roadmap, but we very much have our ear to the street with our customers. And if you have a suggestion or a request of something that we think would be valuable across our customer base, Devashish, Navaneel, and the team, can quickly dive into getting that on our roadmap and building it out.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we just a minute now left, so if there's any other question. Okay.
Maybe a quick last question about the naming convention.
Mm-hmm.
How far can we go?
So you're talking about when we showed on the provisioning form that had the OGRP dash?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, Devashish or Navaneel, I mean, maybe you guys want to jump in here, but I know that there's a lot of flexibility that we have in there with, prefixing. We can append to the end. It can be driven based on the logged in user client context. I mean, do you guys want to add to that?
Okay, sure, do. So, yeah. So am I audible?
We can hear you. Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead, Navaneel.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. So basically, that is the prefix and suffix of certain groups, the teams, all the stuffs in the tenant. So OGRP, which is some prefix which you have already demoed, and that is configured and according to the tenant administrator who enforces certain other predefined prefix or suffix that also can be configured in our application through that configure request form. So only those prefix and suffix will be then shown. So yes, we have that ability actually through these form settings. If you open the form settings too.
Yeah, so we'll just show quickly here. We're not going to get into everything, but on form load, you can run kind of whatever JavaScript you want here, and it has access to the actual the view model, as well as being able to make whatever calls we want against client context or whatever. So there's a lot of flexibility that we can have here, and I believe there's also on per field levels, we can have actions that run there as well. But this is effectively where we would support doing that.
Okay. And
I think we kind of skimmed the surface here, but there's a lot of power under the hood that maybe not everybody would want to see in this session. We'd be more than happy to show. Yep.
And the licenses, how it's working?
So we try and keep fairly transparent. The pricing is actually on the website, so you can go here, list pricing, and we can have a conversation with you further about that.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
So without further ado, I think that was the end of our webinar. Thank you for participating, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.